Okay, so we've moved on to the phylum Mollusca, and these are all soft-bodied organisms. Some of them have shells, some of them do not have shells. So they have the three tissue types. They are protostome development, they are coelomate, and they are bilateral symmetry. And these things you'll be filling in your lab manual. So we're looking at representative samples as snails, slugs, mussels, squid, octopi, cuttlefish. So here's an example of an octopus. As you can see, they've got the suckers and the tentacles. One of the things we'll look at is what does the main part of the body of the organism do? Does it develop underneath a shell? Does it not have a shell, or does it have an internalized shell? Octopi do not have a shell. So their foot, so to speak, which is a part of the mollusk, has separated into tentacles, and they also have cephalization. That means they have a head that has developed that actually has a brain, not quite as developed as ours, but they are very intelligent and they learn very quickly. So there's a major cephalization process going on here. So that is an octopus. That's one of the more intelligent mollusks. A step down from that would be the squid, all right? And the squid has what looks like sort of an arrow-shaped head. They have tentacles, but they also have a beak inside of their mouth made of shell. So it's an internalized shell. And then, of course, we're looking at some other organisms that have, the seashells, the chitons, and the clams and the mussels, some of which have shells and some don't. So another organism that has, that looks similar to, let me see if I can give you the mouth of the cuttlefish. It's larger. It looks similar to an octopi or the octopus, and you can see the tentacles. If you see the suckers on the tentacles there, that's a development from the soft-bodied mass. So instead of being internalized inside of a shell, the body has gotten larger, more head structure, and the tentacles have separated. And then, of course, you can see these sort of, it's hard for me to get the head section to come over here, but you can see this sort of internalized development. That's, no, I'm sorry, not the head section, the tentacle section. The head section is down here in the main body, and then you have your tentacle. And those have sort of like a snail reversing itself and growing the other way and getting larger and becoming more specialized. Okay, so before I go on to just a few more, because the mollusk is a huge group. Phylum Mollusca is a huge group. So let me give you some things that will be helpful in your lab manual. These are protostomes. They are leucotrophozoans, and they have a visceral mass, soft body that contains their internal organs. The mantle is a membranous covering that covers the visceral mass, and it secretes, if they're going to make a shell, that mantle is what secretes the exoskeleton, or that turns into the shell. Then there's the foot. The foot is what is used for locomotion or movement. So if you're a snail, your foot is easy to see, and technically the foot on, say, a squid or an octopi has turned into tentacles. So they move much more quickly and much more efficiently, better direction, and then of course cephalization. The radula, in most of the organisms, there's a radula that's like a tongue with backwards teeth, and it scrapes food up. And then there's a operculum. It's a protective flap that's also the exoskeleton material, and it covers the gills. And you can also see an operculum on fish. Mollusks are not fish, but they do, some of the organisms, some of the species, especially the snails, the ones that need a covering to cover their bodies or their gills inside of a shell, will have an operculum. So not all of the organisms will have an operculum. The organs that you're going to see are normally a circulatory system, heart and gills. You have arteries, you have a nervous system, you have a nerve ring and nerve cords. An excretory system, you will actually have some nephridia that will remove waste from hemolymph. It's not technically blood, it's more like a hemolymph. It's like a mixture of blood and lymphatic fluid. Respiratory system. is usually the mantle, or we call them gills, and this is where gas exchange takes place. So all of this is happening, all these organisms, all of these organs are developing in the coelom, and that's the body cavity where organs fit. Whereas before, when we were looking at porifera, nidaria, and platyhelminthes, those have no body cavity. So taking a look at those differences. So there are three groups. There's the class Gastropoda, or the three that we're taking a look at here. The class Gastropoda, the class Bivalvia, and I think the other one that we mentioned in your book is Cephalopoda. We don't talk too much about Polyplacophora or Scaphopoda. I would like to mention class Polyplacophora because of the chitins. And a representative chitin would be this organism here, and you can see the exoskeleton on the chitin and the soft body underneath. So they can get from this big to sometimes this big. Just depends on what ocean and what species. All right, so and that's class Polyplacophora. So they have plates. They look armored, and they're one of the oldest groups of phylum Mollusca. Another group that's really interesting under the gastropodans is this group here, is the inside of a shell. It's called the nautilus. They're very interesting. They actually look like a cross between a squid inside of a shell. And they pump their tentacles and they move the shell. And these are beautiful. These are natural formations inside of the shell. As you can see, this was one of the things that inspired the golden circle, the geometric formula for the perfect symmetry. Okay, and this is natural formation, which never ceases to amaze me. It's amazing. So this is inside of the nautilus shell, and the nautilus shell. These are the guys, you've probably seen them on the nature shows. So this one was cut. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. So this one was cut, and this is what they basically look like. And when they move through the ocean, they move like this, like that. So their tentacles are coming out here, and they're using that, and then of course they can turn over and protect themselves. This is an amazing, amazing organism. So again, the inside of the nautilus. And of course you have your basic bivalves and your oysters. So your bivalves are two shells that open and close. Mussels, clams, oysters, barnacles, all right? And then shells are sort of a higher step up looking at your bivalves. So again, the classes that we're looking at are your class Bivalvia, your basically your scallops and clams and mussels, and your marine snails in the class Gastropoda, your marine snails, your nudibranch, your land snail, your limpets, you have your marine and terrestrial snails, and then your class Cephalopoda, which everyone is mostly fascinated with, that's your octopi, and your class Polyplacophora. This is not one of your main classes. So this is just, I'm letting you know the class because I want you to know chitin. You need to know chitin, C-H-I-T-O-N. Not to be confused with Titan, it is chitin. And I believe, other than talking about already, which I mentioned, was that the foot, say if you saw a snail, and the bottom of the body of the snail is basically your foot, that turns into, the movement is caused by muscular action. It's all body muscle. So that muscular action, that modifies and turns into tentacles in some of your faster moving organisms like squid, and you've got your cuttlefish here and your octopus. Okay, so there are modifications, but all soft-bodied, 3 tissue types, bilateral symmetry, and then a sort of difference in and very, very developed in their organ systems. All right, I am going to move from there to once again the next youngest phylum, which is phylum Arthropoda.